I've started a new channel called Lunala Tales. Please subscribe and watch my best stories there. Link is in the description. The war began not with a bang but with a piece of cloth. Faded, frayed at the edges, and smelling faintly of smoke, it slipped out of a crate during a routine inspection on Council Station Aurealis Prime. No one paid much attention at first. After all, the Galactic Council processed hundreds of artifacts from border skirmishes every week. A torn flag here, a melted helmet there, maybe the occasional plasma-scorched boot. This was just another forgotten scrap among thousands. The clerk handling it, a pale-skinned Vorexian with 3 eyes and chronic boredom, yawned so hard his jaw clicked before tagging it for the archives. It was a small, triangular patch, blackened with age, bearing a symbol barely visible under the burns, a coiled serpent with fangs bad and wings spread wide. 2 simple words underneath it read Black Vipers. The clerk tossed it into the evidence bin with all the care one might give to a discarded sandwich wrapper and muttered about low wages and late lunch breaks. No one noticed the human historian standing nearby, watching the patch land among broken rifles and dented armor plates. His name was Dr. Elric Stanton, Earth's appointed cultural liaison to the Galactic Council, a man generally described as mild-mannered, polite, and faintly allergic to conflict. He looked at the patch. Then he looked again. And then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he fainted clean away. The clerk sighed, called for medical assistance, and blamed the fainting on low oxygen levels or perhaps human frailty. A council medic confirmed Stanton would survive but kept muttering about his heart rate spiking to near-lethal levels the moment his eyes locked on the patch. The incident was filed as minor human medical episode, given all the attention of a spilled cup of coffee. It was only hours later, when Stanton awoke babbling phrases like not them, anyone but them and why here, why now, that the council finally began to take notice. His panic spread faster than an Andromedan fire mold. Within a day, the patch was brought to the attention of the Galactic Council's High Assembly, an institution famous for slow deliberation, elaborate speeches, and the kind of bureaucracy that could take 3 weeks to approve a bathroom renovation. The assembly chamber was a towering cathedral of glass and light, filled with representatives of every major star system. They were midway through debating tariffs on imported neutron spices when the patch was presented. Stanton, pale and sweating, stood before them, clutching a datapad like a drowning man clings to driftwood. He insisted on speaking before any analysis or discussion, his voice trembling but growing louder with every word. He explained that the Black Vipers were not a unit anyone in their right mind wanted to stumble across. Earth's militaries had produced many fierce regiments, but the Vipers were different. They had been created in desperation during Earth's last interplanetary war, forged from the most dangerous, brilliant, and borderline insane soldiers humanity could find. Their missions were classified so deeply that most governments refused to admit the unit had ever existed. Stanton swore entire enemy fleets had vanished after crossing paths with them, leaving behind only wreckage and unanswered questions. The council members listened, unimpressed. The ambassador from Zorg 9 yawned audibly. The representative from Pelveria asked if humans always named things so dramatically. The trade minister from Gloth Prime suggested this sounded like one of those Earth War stories that ended with heroic music and everyone hugging, probably exaggerated beyond reason. Stanton shook his head violently. No, he insisted, the Vipers were real. He told them about Operation Silent Fang, where the unit allegedly infiltrated an enemy moon base, turned the automated defenses against their own side, and escaped without leaving a single trace. He mentioned the siege of Dracos, where an entire invasion fleet reportedly surrendered after receiving one transmission from the Vipers containing only the words "We are coming." The chamber filled with murmurs. Some laughed nervously. Others whispered about myths and propaganda. The council chair, a towering insectoid with the patience of a glacier, finally asked Stanton the question hanging over the room. If these Black Vipers were so fearsome, why had no one seen them in decades? Stanton's answer was simple. Because they had chosen not to be seen. That silenced even the ambassador from Zorg 9. The patch, he explained, was the first sign of them in over 50 years. It was as if ghosts had left their calling card in the middle of council space. And ghosts, Stanton warned, did not appear without reason. By now, the patch lay under a containment field in the center of the chamber, faint scorch marks still visible across its surface. The Council's Science Division had scanned it thoroughly and found nothing unusual beyond traces of explosives, radiation, and something unidentifiable that made the lead scientist's antenna curl in confusion. Some members demanded immediate outreach to Earth's military for clarification. Others argued it was a relic, nothing more, not worth derailing discussions about neutron spice tariffs. But then a low-ranking intelligence officer entered the chamber with a datapad and a face that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. He reported that the patch had been recovered from the wreckage of a raider ship near the Council's border systems. Said ship had been reduced to scrap by unknown attackers using tactics so precise, so terrifyingly efficient, that no one aboard had survived long enough to send a distress call. The chamber erupted in chaos. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages. Someone shouted about military retaliation. Someone else suggested surrendering immediately, though to whom was unclear. The ambassador from Zorg 9 fainted, hitting the floor with a wet thud. Amid the uproar, Dr. Stanton simply sat down, head in his hands, whispering words no translator could quite catch. The Galactic Council had spent centuries building treaties, fleets, and bureaucracies to maintain order across thousands of worlds. They had planned for wars, rebellions, plagues, and cosmic disasters. But they had never planned for the return of the Black Vipers. The Galactic Council wasted no time after the chaos in the chamber. Panic had a way of making even the slowest bureaucracies move with surprising speed. Within hours, a delegation of Council intelligence officers, linguists, historians, and one very reluctant Dr. Elric Stanton found themselves on a shuttle heading for Earth's Central Military Archives. The Council chair had decided that before they risked a full-blown interstellar incident, they needed answers about the Black Vipers directly from the source. Earth officials had initially resisted the request, pointing out that many of the files were not only classified but locked under protocols that required special clearance and, in one case, the consent of something called the Widow's Protocol, which turned out to be an artificial intelligence rumored to have opinions about everything and patience for nothing. The archives themselves were buried beneath kilometers of rock in a facility known simply as the Deep Vault. The shuttle descended through layers of atmospheric shields, drone defenses, and enough weaponry to make even the bravest pilot sweat. The Council delegation disembarked nervously, staring at the massive steel doors ahead. They were greeted by General Arden Cole, a man whose expression suggested he had seen every form of galactic idiocy and expected to see several more before lunch. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "You want the Black Vipers files," he said flatly. "Fine. But you might regret it." That was when Stanton began explaining the Council's situation at high speed, words tripping over one another as he described the recovered patch, the destroyed raider ship, and the growing panic in the assembly. The general listened silently before turning toward the sealed doors of the archive. He spoke a single word into a security panel. It scanned his retina, voice-sprint, and DNA, then asked him a riddle in ancient Greek before finally opening with a hiss of pressure locks. The inside of the deep vault felt more like a cathedral than a military installation. Rows of towering data pillars rose into darkness, glowing faintly as if holding the memories of centuries. The Widow's Protocol, an AI housed somewhere in the depths of the system, announced its presence through a voice that was smooth, genderless, and dripping with disdain. "Accessing Black Vipers files," it said. "Please note this action will void approximately 14 interplanetary treaties, 7 executive orders, and 1 personal promise made by General Cole to his grandmother. Proceeding anyway because apparently no one listens to me." The first file flickered to life on a holoscreen. It contained grainy footage from over a century ago, labeled Operation Hollow Serpent. The Council delegation leaned forward as it played, showing a small team of armored soldiers infiltrating what appeared to be a heavily fortified enemy station. There was no sound, only subtitles describing events as they unfolded. The soldiers moved like shadows, disabling entire squads of defenders with terrifying efficiency. At one point, a single operative planted explosives while simultaneously juggling communications, medical care for a wounded ally, and what looked suspiciously like brewing coffee over a portable heater. The mission ended with the station erupting into flames while the Vipers escaped in a stolen enemy shuttle, leaving behind a message carved into the wreckage: "Sorry about your base." The council delegates stayed in stunned silence. The ambassador from Pelveria finally asked if Earth soldiers always behaved like this. Stanton explained in a strained voice that the Black Vipers had been unconventional. They were recruited from the best special forces across Earth's nations, then trained to an extreme that made ordinary soldiers look like cadets on a field trip. Their tactics blended genius-level strategy with what could only be described as reckless improvisation. They could hijack fleets using misinformation campaigns, lure enemy commanders into traps with fake peace treaties, or, in one memorable incident, convince an entire armada to retreat by broadcasting a single image of their unit logo alongside the words "We dare you." Another file detailed Operation Glass Fang, where the Vipers allegedly neutralized a rogue AI uprising on Titan Prime using a combination of electromagnetic pulses, psychological warfare, and, according to one baffled report, weaponized opera music blasted through enemy comms until the machines surrendered out of what analysts could only assume was despair. As the council members absorbed mission after mission, a slow horror began to dawn on them. This was not a conventional military unit bound by predictable rules of engagement. This was a force designed to win by any means necessary, a unit given full autonomy during wartime and rumored to answer only to a shadow council within Earth's government. Some missions were so heavily redacted that entire pages were nothing but black lines and footnotes reading information removed for your safety. The delegation learned that the Black Vipers had disappeared from public record after their final mission, Operation Ghost Fang. Details were scarce, but fragments suggested it involved a weapon of unimaginable power, an enemy alliance spanning multiple systems, and a battle so secretive that even the names of participating planets were erased. The unit had not been officially disbanded. They had simply vanished. No debriefings. No retirement ceremonies. Nothing. One council intelligence officer asked whether Earth had tried to track them down afterward. General Cole gave a dry laugh that held no humor. Track them down? Son, we never even knew where they were half the time when they worked for us. The Widow's protocol interrupted again, noting that the Vipers had erased their own records from several systems before disappearing, leaving behind only rumors. Some claimed they became mercenaries. Others believed they lived among civilian populations under assumed identities. A few conspiracy theorists insisted they had built their own secret colony somewhere beyond charted space, waiting for the day humanity might need them again. The ambassador from Zorg 9 muttered something about superstition and legends, clearly unconvinced. That was when the Widow's protocol displayed the final recovered image from Operation Ghost Fang. It was a simple photo taken aboard a dropship. The Vipers stood together in combat gear, faces hidden behind helmets, holding their unit flag. Scrawled across the bottom in bold letters were 4 words clearly addressed to anyone who might find it in the future. "We will be back." No one spoke for several seconds. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. The council members shifted uneasily. Stanton ran a hand through his hair, muttering that if the Vipers had returned now, after all these years, it could only mean something catastrophic was coming. General Cole finally shut down the holoscreens and looked at the delegation with the expression of a man delivering bad news to people who did not yet understand how bad it was going to get. "If the Black Vipers are on the move again," he said slowly, "then God help whoever stands in their way." The Galactic Council returned to Aurealis Prime with far less confidence than when they had left. What began as mild curiosity had grown into something that felt uncomfortably like dread. News of the Black Vipers' possible return spread through council channels faster than the official security protocols could contain it. By the time the delegation arrived back on station, rumors had reached every corner of the sprawling government complex. Some claimed the Vipers had already destroyed 3 pirate fleets in border space. Others whispered about entire planets being evacuated after sightings of their emblem. A few swore they had seen a dropship bearing the serpent and wings insignia hovering above a neutral moon before vanishing without a trace. Inside the main council chamber, panic took on its usual form: bureaucracy. Endless committees sprang into existence overnight, all demanding reports, risk assessments, and strategic forecasts. Politicians debated everything from military readiness to whether the council should issue a formal apology for accidentally recovering the patch in the first place. The ambassador from Zorg 9 argued for immediate surrender to the Vipers, even though no one was entirely sure what surrendering would involve. The representative from Gloth Prime insisted the council double its fleet size immediately, ignoring the minor problem that this would bankrupt half the member systems. In the middle of this chaos sat Dr. Elric Stanton, looking like a man trapped inside his own worst nightmare. He had spent years trying to convince the Galactic Council that Earth was more than just a backwater world filled with stubborn politicians and unhelpful weather. Now the legend of the Black Vipers threatened to undo all of his carefully built diplomatic work. Every time he tried to explain that the Vipers were not technically hostile unless provoked, someone reminded him that provoking them might be as simple as existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Council's Intelligence Division finally presented the first real evidence of the Vipers' current activities. A surveillance probe near the border system of Syrinx had recorded a brief, scrambled transmission on a frequency not used in decades. The message was short, heavily distorted, and spoken in a language so obscure that only Stanton and one very enthusiastic linguistics intern could translate it. 3 words emerged clearly from the static before the signal cut off entirely. "Stay out. Ours." The council chamber erupted into shouting as soon as the words were read aloud. Half the representatives assumed this was a declaration of war. The other half thought it might be a warning about some larger threat. One delegate suggested the Vipers were simply claiming ownership of the border system itself, though no one could explain why they would want a desolate region filled mostly with abandoned mining colonies and the occasional illegal moonshine distillery. Military strategists were summoned to analyze the message. After several hours and 3 pots of heavily caffeinated Threxian tea, they announced their conclusion: the Vipers were definitely angry about something. No one found this particularly helpful. While the council argued, Stanton received a discreet message from a source on a remote moon called Bracca 7. It was a name buried in the footnotes of old Vipers files, mentioned only once in connection with a soldier listed as officially retired. The message claimed this man now ran a bar under an assumed name and occasionally talked too much when drunk. Against his better judgment, Stanton brought the information to the council, hoping to finally get some answers. A small team was assembled immediately, consisting of Stanton, 2 intelligence officers, a translator, and for reasons never explained, the ambassador from Zorg 9, who insisted on coming along despite fainting at least once per meeting whenever the Vipers were mentioned. They traveled aboard a discreet civilian transport rather than a council vessel, hoping to avoid attention. Bracca 7 turned out to be little more than a chunk of rock orbiting a dying star, home to scattered settlements, repair yards for outdated freighters, and exactly one establishment advertising itself as the Last Stop Tavern. Inside, the air smelled of engine fuel, cheap alcohol, and bad decisions. Behind the bar stood a broad-shouldered man with weathered features and eyes that seemed to notice everything without moving. Stanton recognized him instantly from one of the few unredacted Black Vipers photographs. This was Commander Rafe Maddox, listed as missing in action after Operation Ghost Fang nearly 50 years earlier. They approached carefully. Maddox poured drinks without looking at them and asked what had brought a council delegation to the middle of nowhere. Stanton explained about the patch, the rumors, the transmission, and the growing panic back on Aurealis Prime. Maddox listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Stanton finally asked if the Black Vipers were active again, Maddox gave a low chuckle that did nothing to ease anyone's nerves. "Active," he said slowly. "That depends on how you define it. We swore we were done after Ghost Fang. Most of us scattered, tried to live quiet lives. But someone dug up something they shouldn't have, and now the old unit's been talking again." "What was taken?" Stanton asked. Maddox looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Something we were supposed to bury forever." Something too dangerous for any government, any council, any warlord. And now it's out there, in the wrong hands. Before Stanton could press for details, Maddox leaned closer, his voice dropping low. Tell your council this. The Black Vipers are not your enemy. Not yet. But if they get in our way, if they try to stop us, then they will learn what real enemies look like. The ambassador from Zorg 9 fainted again, sliding under the table with a soft thump. Maddox ignored him and poured another drink. Whatever was coming, whatever had dragged the Black Vipers out of retirement after half a century, he clearly had no intention of letting the council handle it alone. And judging by the steel in his voice, Stanton realized with a sinking feeling that the council might not have a choice in the matter at all. The council delegation returned from Braca 7 with more questions than answers. Stanton filed a report summarizing Maddox's words, though he deliberately left out the part where the retired commander threatened to make enemies of the entire Galactic Council if they interfered. Some truths, Stanton decided, could wait until after his next anxiety medication. Still, the message was clear enough. The Black Vipers were hunting something far more dangerous than themselves, and the Council had no idea what it was. That changed 2 days later when the Council's intelligence division intercepted fragments of encrypted chatter on the dark channels used by mercenaries, smugglers, and warlords. After 20 straight hours of decryption work, the fragments revealed a name that made every military analyst on Aurealis Prime curse under their breath. The weapon was called the Erebos Shard, an ancient superweapon built centuries ago by a now-extinct species known as the Drakari. According to legend, it could destabilize the core of a star, turning entire systems into nothing but drifting ash. The Drakari had destroyed themselves with it in the end, wiping out their own empire in a chain reaction no one had ever been able to replicate. The shards of the original weapon had supposedly been gathered, sealed away, and hidden across the galaxy. Apparently, one of those shards had resurfaced. The fragments suggested a rogue warlord named Kale Vaughn had acquired the Erebos shard through means no one could trace. Vaughn was infamous across Council space for raiding colonies, hijacking convoys, and selling weapons to whichever side paid him the most credits. He commanded a fleet of retrofitted warships held together by scavenged technology and sheer stubbornness. Until now, his ambitions had been limited to piracy and black market dealing. If he truly possessed the Erebos shard, his power would increase from petty criminal to galactic threat overnight. The Council assembled an emergency session as soon as the intelligence reports arrived. Representatives shouted over one another in panic while military strategists debated strike options none of them actually had the resources to carry out. The ambassador from Zorg 9 suggested immediate surrender again before fainting halfway through his speech. Stanton tried to explain that the Black Vipers were almost certainly after the shard themselves, that they might even stop Vaughn before he could use it, but no one listened. The Council had never been good at calm decision-making, and now hysteria spread through the chamber like fire through dry grass. Things grew worse when a courier drone arrived carrying a message from Kale Vaughn himself. It was addressed to the entire Council and broadcast on every public channel across 3 sectors. The holographic image of the warlord filled the chamber, showing a man with a scarred face, cold eyes, and the smug grin of someone who knew he now held the galaxy hostage. He announced that the Erebos shard was real, functional, and fully under his control. He proved it by detonating the core of an uninhabited star system on the edge of Council space. The Council watched in horrified silence as real-time footage showed 3 barren planets vaporized in a chain reaction of blinding light. Then Vaughn made his demands. Every Council fleet was to stand down. Every law enforcement patrol was to leave his smuggling routes untouched. Every bounty on his head was to be cancelled. In exchange, he promised not to use the shard again unless provoked. He ended the transmission with a warning that the next system he destroyed might not be empty. Panic erupted in the chamber. Some demanded immediate military retaliation, ignoring the fact that the Council fleets would be obliterated before reaching his base. Others argued for negotiations, hoping Vaughn could be bribed or intimidated into surrendering the shard. Stanton tried again to raise the subject of the Black Vipers, pointing out that they were likely the only ones with the skill to infiltrate Vaughn's defenses and recover the weapon, but the council chair silenced him with a wave. That was when the second transmission arrived. This one was shorter, scrambled, and carried no signature except for the coiled serpent emblem stamped across the top. 4 words appeared on screen, written in the same bold script Stanton had seen in the Deep Vault archives. "We are already moving." The council chamber descended into chaos again. Some delegates demanded coordination with the Vipers immediately, while others insisted the unit was just as dangerous as Vaughn himself. The ambassador from Pelveria declared the entire situation a conspiracy between Earth and the Vipers to seize control of the Council, though he offered no evidence beyond the fact that Earth's military records contained too many classified files for his liking. Meanwhile, reports began flooding in from border systems. Vaughn's ships were on the move, spreading out across multiple sectors. Intelligence analysts believed he planned to auction off fragments of the Erebos shard to the highest bidder while keeping the primary device for himself. Every major criminal syndicate in the galaxy was sending representatives to a secret location for the auction. If even one shard fell into the wrong hands, entire systems could vanish overnight. The Council finally voted to deploy a fleet to intercept Vaughn before the auction could take place. It was a hasty decision, born of desperation rather than strategy. Within hours, half the Council's available warships were en route to the coordinates provided by an anonymous informant. They never reached their destination. 2 days into the mission, the entire fleet was ambushed by Vaughn's forces in a trap so perfectly executed that military tacticians later described it with a mixture of awe and despair. Decoy transmissions lured the Council ships into a narrow asteroid field, where hidden mines disabled their engines before Vaughn's cruisers emerged from stealth fields and annihilated them one by one. Only a handful of escape pods survived to relay what had happened. The Council chamber fell into stunned silence as the casualty reports arrived. Stanton realized with growing dread that Vaughn was always one step ahead because someone inside the Council was feeding him information. The failed fleet assault left the Council defenseless, its resources crippled, its leadership in disarray. And somewhere out there, moving through shadows, the Black Vipers were hunting both Vaughn and the Erebos shard. Whether they would reach him before he destroyed another system was anyone's guess. The Council had been humiliated. Half their fleet was gone, their borders were in chaos, and every news channel across the galaxy now carried the same headline declaring Cale Vaughn untouchable. The footage of the destroyed star system replayed endlessly on public feeds, followed by analysis from experts who all agreed on one thing: if the warlord struck a populated world next, the death toll would be measured in billions. Protests erupted on dozens of Council worlds demanding immediate action, but no one knew what that action should be. Every conventional strategy had failed before it even began. The Council had nothing left to rely on but desperation, and desperation eventually led them back to the name everyone had been too afraid to speak aloud until now. The decision to reach out to the Black Vipers came only after 3 straight days of frantic debate. Some delegates argued that inviting them into Council affairs was as dangerous as Vaughn himself. Others insisted that the galaxy was already on fire, and it made no sense to turn away the only people who had ever fought wars the way he did. Finally, the Council chair ordered a message sent on every frequency the Vipers were rumored to monitor. It was short, direct, and carried the weight of a government swallowing its pride. "We request alliance against Cale Vaughn. Terms open. Respond." The answer came 12 hours later when a dropship with no identification codes entered orbit above Aurealis Prime. Defense batteries locked on it instantly, but the ship ignored every hail, transmitting only landing coordinates before descending straight toward the Council complex. Security teams surrounded the landing pad as the ship touched down with a hiss of venting gas. 5 figures emerged, clad in black armor marked with the coiled serpent emblem. Their helmets were featureless, their movements precise, and their presence radiated the kind of calm that came from people who had seen too much war to be impressed by threats. The leader removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face Stanton recognized from archive footage. Commander Rafe Maddox looked older now, streaks of gray in his hair, but there was nothing tired about his eyes. "Take us to your council," he said simply. Inside the chamber, The delegates fell silent as the Black Vipers entered. Even the ambassador from Zorg 9 managed not to faint this time, though he did grip the edge of his desk like a man preparing for turbulence. Maddox listened as the council chair described the fleet's destruction, Vaughn's growing power, and the risk of more star systems being erased if the Erebos shard was not recovered immediately. When the chair finally finished, Maddox spoke with the bluntness of someone uninterested in political theater. "We will stop Vaughn," he said. "But understand this. We do not work for you. We will coordinate to prevent civilian casualties, but we choose our own methods. And if anyone here leaks our movements to him like they leaked your fleets, you will not like what happens next." Several delegates shifted uneasily, clearly aware that someone among them had betrayed the council during the last operation. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. No one admitted anything. Plans were made quickly after that. The Vipers revealed they had already tracked the location of Vaughn's auction to a derelict megastructure in the Veil Nebula, an abandoned mining complex large enough to house his entire fleet. Criminal syndicates, warlords, and rogue mercenary captains were gathering there, lured by the promise of bidding on fragments of the Erebos shard. Maddox's plan was simple in theory and suicidal in practice. The Vipers would infiltrate the station, disable its defenses, and secure the shard before Vaughn or his buyers could escape with it. The Council offered what little support they could provide after losing half their fleet. A handful of surviving warships would wait on the edge of the system to intercept fleeing vessels once the shard was secured. Stanton was ordered to accompany the Vipers as the Council's liaison, though no one asked whether he wanted the job. He spent the entire flight to the Veil Nebula regretting every career choice that had brought him here. The derelict station loomed ahead like the skeleton of some long-dead giant, its metal framework glowing faintly under the nebula's shifting light. Vaughn's fleet surrounded it, ships bristling with weapons scavenged from a dozen battlefields. The Viper's dropship drifted toward the station disguised as a smuggler transport, broadcasting stolen access codes Maddox had acquired through methods Stanton chose not to ask about. Inside the dropship, the Vipers prepared with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this too many times before. Weapons were checked, explosives counted, escape routes memorized. One operative with a voice like gravel casually mentioned betting 5 credits the ambassador from Zorg 9 would faint before the mission ended. No one disagreed. The auction was already underway when they slipped aboard through a maintenance hatch. Stanton followed nervously as the Vipers moved through the shadows, avoiding patrols and security drones with impossible precision. From a balcony overlooking the main chamber, they saw Vaughn himself standing before a gathering of crime lords and mercenary captains, the Erebos shard resting inside a containment field behind him. Its dark surface pulsed faintly, as if aware of the destruction it could unleash. Vaughn began accepting bids transmitted from across the galaxy. Entire fortunes were offered in exchange for fragments of the weapon. The main device, he announced, would remain under his personal control as the ultimate deterrent against any government foolish enough to oppose him. That was when everything went wrong at once. A council operative hiding among the criminal delegates tried to sabotage the containment field, hoping to steal the shard before the Vipers or Vaughn could react. The attempt triggered alarms across the station as automated defenses came online. Vaughn shouted orders to his guards while the crime lords opened fire on each other, convinced the betrayal was part of some larger double-cross. Maddox swore under his breath and signaled the Vipers to move. Silenced rifles dropped guards before they could reach the shard. Explosives disabled automated turrets with surgical precision. Stanton crawled behind a pillar, praying the armor-piercing rounds ricocheting overhead would forget about him entirely. Through the chaos, Vaughn retreated toward the landing bays with the Erebos shard in tow. The Vipers pursued him through collapsing corridors as alarms blared and fire suppression systems spewed smoke and steam. Somewhere behind them, the auction chamber erupted in a chain reaction as panicked mercenaries detonated their own ships to prevent anyone else from claiming the weapon. By the time they reached the landing bay, Vaughn was already boarding his personal cruiser. The Erebos shard glowed ominously under his arm like a beating heart. Maddox signaled the team to split up, some laying down covering fire while he and 2 others sprinted toward the closing ramp. Stanton followed only because the alternative involved staying behind with angry mercenaries and a station rapidly falling apart around him. They made it aboard just as the cruiser lifted off, carrying them toward a final confrontation none of them was certain they would survive. The interior of Cale Vaughn's cruiser was a maze of narrow corridors, armored bulkheads, and flickering lights that turned everything into jagged shadows. The ship roared beneath their feet as its engines pushed for maximum speed, tearing away from the burning station and the chaos left behind. Maddox led the way with the calm precision of someone who had boarded enemy vessels more times than he could count. Behind him, Stanton stumbled after the Vipers, heart hammering in his chest, wondering how a simple cultural liaison had ended up charging through a warlord's flagship while carrying exactly 0 weapons and a deep personal desire to survive until retirement. The first wave of Vaughn's soldiers came at them near the engineering deck. Maddox's team moved like lightning, dropping enemies before they had time to shout warnings. One soldier lunged at Stanton, only to be clotheslined by a Viper appearing from nowhere. Stanton barely had time to thank the man before they were moving again, deeper into the ship, following the trail toward the command deck where Vaughn and the Erebos Shard would be waiting. Every corridor shook as the cruiser's guns opened fire behind them, blasting apart Council interceptors that had arrived too late to stop its escape. Through small viewing ports, Stanton glimpsed the battle outside, Council ships engaging Vaughn's escorts while debris from the destroyed station drifted through the nebula like glowing ash. The entire region had become a war zone within minutes, and at the center of it all was this single ship carrying a weapon capable of wiping out entire systems. They reached the command deck doors just as they slammed shut, locking Vaughn inside with the Shard. Maddox planted explosives while the rest of the team held off reinforcements approaching from both sides of the corridor. The blast tore the doors apart in a shower of sparks, and the Vipers surged through the smoke with weapons ready. Cale Vaughn stood at the far end of the deck beside the containment field holding the Erebos Shard. The glow from the weapon painted his face in cold light as he raised a sleek pistol, aiming it directly at Maddox. "I know you," Vaughn said with a smile that carried no warmth. "The great Commander Rafe Maddox. The Black Vipers. Legends wrapped in shadows. I always wondered when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you disappeared into." "Give us the Shard," Maddox said, his voice flat as stone. Vaughn laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "You think I stole this to sell it? The auction was just bait. A way to draw out every rival I had and burn them all in one place. No, Maddox. I took this because I intend to finish what the Drakari started. The galaxy needs fear. Fear brings order. And nothing breeds fear like the power to turn stars into ash." He tapped the control panel beside the containment field, and the Shard pulsed brighter, as though sensing its own awakening. Across the deck, Stanton felt a wave of cold run through him, as if the weapon were alive and aware of every life around it. Maddox moved first. A flash grenade hit the floor between them, filling the room with blinding light and deafening sound. The Vipers opened fire, forcing Vaughn behind a console while Maddox and 2 others sprinted for the containment field. Stanton stayed low, covering his head as energy bolts carved glowing scars into the walls around him. Vaughn fought like a man who had survived 100 battles and expected to survive 100 more. He triggered automated turrets from hidden panels, forcing the Vipers into cover. One operative went down with a cry as a blast caught his shoulder, spinning him to the floor. Another turret exploded when a Viper launched a micromissile straight into its barrel, showering the deck with fragments. Maddox reached the containment controls, fingers flying across the panel to disable the weapon's failsafes. But Vaughn was already moving, firing as he advanced. A shot grazed Maddox's arm, burning through his armor and drawing blood. The commander dropped behind the console while another Viper dragged him out of the line of fire. It was Stanton, of all people, who realized what Vaughn was doing. The warlord wasn't just defending the Shard. He was trying to activate it. Each shot he fired drove the Vipers back while his free hand worked a secondary control panel wired directly into the containment field. Lights along the device's surface shifted from blue to red as power surged through its core. "He's going to fire it," Stanton shouted, though no one needed the warning. The rising hum of the Shard's energy filled the room, a sound like distant thunder rolling through metal bones. Maddox pushed himself up despite the wound in his arm. "Cover me," he ordered, before sprinting straight toward Vaughn. The two men collided in a blur of fists, weapons, and fury, slamming against the panel as the shard's glow brightened to a blinding glare. Vaughn fought with the strength of desperation, landing a punch that sent Maddox staggering, but the commander came back swinging, driving the warlord across the deck with a tackle that nearly shattered the console beneath them. A single shot rang out. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vaughn collapsed, clutching his side where Maddox's sidearm had found its mark. The warlord tried to rise, hatred burning in his eyes, but Maddox ripped the control chip from the panel and hurled it across the deck before driving his fist into Vaughn's jaw, dropping him for good. The shard's glow faded slowly as its power cycle aborted. Emergency lights replaced the blinding radiance while the Vipers secured the deck and bound the unconscious warlord in restraints. Stanton leaned against the nearest wall, shaking from adrenaline, exhaustion, and the lingering sense that the weapon was still watching them somehow, waiting for another chance. Minutes later, Council Marines boarded the crippled cruiser after the last of Vaughn's fleet fled into the nebula. The Erebos shard was sealed inside a containment vault surrounded by layers of shielding and guards who looked ready to shoot anyone who so much as breathed on it. Maddox handed control of the ship to the Council forces without ceremony, refusing to answer questions from reporters already demanding statements about the legendary Black Vipers. When Stanton finally approached him, the commander was staring out a viewport at the burning wreckage drifting through the nebula. "Is it over?" Stanton asked. Maddox shook his head. "For now. But someone will always go looking for power like this. When they do, we will be there." Before Stanton could reply, the Vipers were already boarding their dropship. Within minutes, they were gone, vanishing into the stars without leaving so much as a signature on Council sensors. Days later, the Galactic Council passed new security measures, funded reconstruction for border systems, and swore they would be ready next time. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, rumors spread again. Of a black emblem with coiled wings and fangs. Of a unit that appeared only when the stakes were highest. Of the ghosts who never stayed buried for long. And far from Council space, aboard a ship with no name, Maddox placed the recovered shard inside a vault only the Vipers knew existed. He locked it, turned away, and gave the order to jump to deep space. The Black Vipers had disappeared again. But everyone understood now what the Galactic Council had learned too late. You did not ignore the faded patch. Not ever.